Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Beis of Masechta Sheqalim. Daf Yud Beis. It's a hard one. Tomorrow, though, we start getting into a few days of some really amazing Gemaras. So, another day of hard Gemara, followed by some really awesome days of Gemara. So, let's do our best here. Says the Mishnah, Amaktish Nechasov, if somebody is Maktish his property, what does it mean? He basically says, all right, I'm going to give all my stuff to the Beis HaMikdash, okay? Now, on his property, included in his property, are things that are fit for communal offerings. We're going to have to figure out what are these communal offerings. Fine. So it says Rabbi Akiva, well, these communal offering things, just give them to the artisans as their wages, okay? Amar lo Ben Azai says to Rabbi Akiva, you can't just give these things directly to the artisans. Ela mafrishin mein schar omanin. No, rather you set aside the money that you would use to pay for these artisans. Umchalin also an almos omanin, and then you take these these items, you deconsecrate the items, you transfer their kedusha onto the money that you have set aside for the artisans. V'nosin osam leomanin. And then once you've deconsecrated these items, you could then pay them with them. And then you go back and take the new shekel coins and you buy back these items, and then by doing so, the holiness, the kedusha of the new shekels gets transferred to them. Just like we saw the other day about Ketores, and the Gemara is actually going to say that we're talking about Ketores here as well. So basically this machlokas here is about what do you do if a guy is makdish his property, and on the property there is Ketores, either because an individual is allowed to make Ketores, or because he's from the house of Avtinas. Okay, so then, so there's machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai about, can you use this Ketores to pay the workers directly, or do you first have to deconsecrate it? If somebody consecrates his property, and there was an animal that was fit to go on the Mizbeach, male animals, female animals. Rabbi Eliezer says, well, the male animals need to be sold, and then that person will offer it as a korban ola. And the female animals that are on his property, you sell so that somebody could bring it as a korban shlamim. Now, an ola has to be a male. An ola cannot be a female. So that is why we say that the males you can sell, and the person will bring an ola with it, and the females you could sell, and they could bring a shlamim. A shlamim can be either male or female, so the females could be a shlamim. And then the money that this fellow receives for selling these items that he's consecrated, that money now will be given to Bedek Habayis. Because basically, there's two different types of kedushas, right, of hektish. There's Bedek Habayis, which is temple upkeep, but then there's also hektish mizbeach, right, animals that can go on the Mizbeach, and you can't really mix and match. There are two different types of hektish, and therefore, when this fellow is maktish all of his property, and on his property is animals, now animals go on the Mizbeach, not Bedek Habayis. So what do you do? So what you can do is, you can basically sell them, and then by selling them, because you were maktish your property, which means that you were maktish them as Bedek Habayis. So you're kind of stuck, because you're makdish them as Bedek Habayis, but you can't put Bedek Habayis on the Mizbeach, because you need to put Kosher Mizbeach on the Mizbeach, not Kosher Bedek Habayis. So by selling them, somebody gives you money in exchange for the animals, and you transfer the Kedusha of the Bedek Habayis, Hektish Bedek Habayis, you transfer the value of the Hektish Bedek Habayis from the animals onto that money. And now the animals no longer have Hektish Bedek Habayis. This person can then be makdish the animals as korbanis, and the money that you receive now has the kedusha of the Bedek Habayis from the animals. And then, as Rabbi Eliezer says, Yiplum Shar Nechas Bedek Habayis, that now the money that he received for these animals just becomes like the rest of his property, and it's going to be for Bedek Habayis. Rabbi Yeshua Omer says, Rabbi Yeshua Zcharim Atzman Yikarvu Olis. Rabbi Yeshua says you don't actually have to sell them. The males themselves you can bring as korban olas. Unikevis yimachu l'tzarkei zivchei shlamim. Now the nikevis, the females, you have to actually sell for shlamim. And then v'yavi b'dmei and olos, and then with the money that you get from them, you bring a korban olah. Because we're going to see that that stam, when you're makdish animals for kadshe mizbeach, right? Because according to Rabbi Yoshua, the animals are kadshe mizbeach, right? Meaning, whereas according to Rabbi Eliezer, we said that when he's makdish all of his property, so all of it is kadshe bedek habayis. Now you have a shtickle problem here because the animals, you can't put on the mizbech if they're kadshe bedek habayis, so you sell them and then the money becomes quite kadshe bedek habayis. Now according to Rabbi Yoshua, however, these animals are kadshe mizbech, and therefore the ola itself, you just can offer the zcharim, the males, you can offer immediately as korban olas. However, the females, now the assumption is that when you're makdish your animals, you're makdish them as korban olas. Now, a female can't be a korban ola, so you sell a female for what it can be, which is a shlamim, and then you use that money for an ola because mistama, when you were makdish your animals, you makdish them as olas. And then all the other non-animal property that he has will become bedek habayis stuff. Kachi bedek habayis. Amar Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Ra'ani as divrei Rabbi Eliezer, divrei Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Akiva says, look, I prefer Rabbi Eliezer's opinion over Rabbi Yoshua's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer hishves midos of Rabbi Yoshua chilek, because Rabbi Eliezer was consistent. Rabbi Eliezer says, look, the non-animal items become kachi bedek habayis. The animal items become according to Rabbi Eliezer, everything's kachi bedek habayis, right? Now, when it comes to animals, what are you going to do with them? Because you have to, how are you going to be able to put them on the mizbech if they're kachi bedek habayis? So you have to sell them, and then the money becomes kachi bedek habayis. But everything is ultimately kachi bedek habayis. However, according to Rabbi Yoshua, you kind of have a lot of stuff going on. Some things are kachi bedek habayis, some things are kachi mizbeach, and then the males you can slaughter themselves, the females you have to sell, and then the value you can bring as olas kilo becomes a lot more complicated according to Rabbi Yoshua. So therefore Rabbi Akiva says that he prefers the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer because it's more consistent. Amra papayis shamaiti is divrei shnein. Papayis says, look, both of them are correct. Hamaktish beferish ke divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That when somebody explicitly is makdish his property and is also makdish his animals, so then it's like Rabbi Eliezer, because how come we didn't specify that, well, this is kachi bedek habayis and this is kachi mizbeach? Instead, he's just like stam makdish the items as well as his animals. So in that case, he intends for all of it to be bedek habayis. So that's like Rabbi Eliezer. V'makdish stam k'divrei Rabbi Yoshua, where somebody's just, I'm makdish everything. Well, then it's like Rabbi Yoshua that, well, the non-animal items are going to be bedek habayis and the animal items will be kachi mizbeach. A fellow who is makdish all of his property, and he has things that can go on the mizbeach, things like wines, oils, birds. Rabbi Eliezer Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer. Now, the note in the article pointed out that this is probably Rabbi Elazar, because this is different than the Rabbi Eliezer that we saw earlier. He says, Yimachu l'tzarche oso hamin v'yavi b'tmein olos u'shar nechasim yiplu levedek habayis. So what you could do is that you could take these items, these oils and flowers and these wines, oils, and birds, and you could sell them to people who need wine, oil, and birds. And then with their money, you bring korban olas, kind of like what Rabbi Yeshua was saying. And everything else becomes bedek habayis. Says the Gemara, Maktish v'chule the korbanos tzibur. Rabbi Yochanan Omer says Rabbi Yochanan korbanos, ketoris. So Rabbi Yochanan says that our Mishnah is talking about ketoris. So when we say that a person who's makdish all of his stuff and he has things that are fit for communal offerings, that's talking about ketoris. Amar Boshai tifta b'uman mishel beis avtinas. So Rabbi Boshai says that it's specifically talking about the craftsmen from the family of Avtinas, that they would do the ketoris. Now, in the event that they got paid with ketoris, and then they were like deconsecrated the ketoris onto money, and then they kind of paid them with that ketoris, and then he was immediately like makdish his property before they had a chance to like bring the new Sheqalim and put it onto the ketoris. So that's what we're talking about when he's makdish his property, right? But not just like any regular person being makdish ketoris. Shayinota b'schar ketoris, that he would take as his wages ketoris. Matam ben Azai shein hektish mischal al malacha el alamos. There was machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai about the ketoris, if you could pay the workers directly with this ketoris, or do you first have to be mischal it onto money? Rabbi Akiva says you could pay the workers directly. Ben Azai says you have to be mischal onto money. It's because Rabbi Akiva says that you're allowed to be mischal money onto work, whereas Ben Azai says that you're not allowed to be mischal money onto work, and therefore you have to be mischal it onto money first. Talmud Tanina, we learned in a mission over there, Yesh b'kotche bedek habayis, that there is bedek habayis is sort of more inclusive, is broader than kotche mizbeach. Shestam hekdeshos bedek habayis, because stam, if you're makdish something without specifying what kind of hekdesh you're doing, it's going to be for bedek habayis, for the temple upkeep. Hekdesh bedek habayis chol al hakol. Also, bedek habayis hekdesh can be with everything, even sticks and stones can become. You can donate to the Beis Hamikdash. And also there's din me'ila not just by them, but also their offspring. So if you're a makdish an animal, and then even though you're not supposed to be makdish an animal for bedek habayis, you're supposed to be makdish an animal for kachim mizbeach. But nonetheless, if you are, so then their offspring will also there'll be a din me'ila. You can't, if you get benefit for them by accident, you have to bring a korban ashram me'ilos. And bedek habayis, there's no benefit to kohanim, right? Animal, right? Kachim mizbeach. So then they if it's a shlom, they bunch of animals, they get to eat part of it, and even if they can't, they likely get the hides. Amr B'Chananya to Rabbi Eliezer, he says Rabbi Chananya that this mission is Taka Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanina Namaktish Nechosav V'Oisa Boyen Behema Re'uya Agabe Mizbeach. Because in our mission we said that if somebody is maktish all of his property, and part of his property there was an animal that was fit to go on the mizbeach, zuchar munekevis, males and females. Rabbi Eliezer, says Rabbi Eliezer, zuchar mimachu letzarkei olis, that the males are going to be sold for as olas, and unekevi yimachu letzarkei zivchei shlam, and the females will be sold for shlam. Udmein yiplu imshar nechosav v'edek habayis, and then their money falls with the rest of his property to bedek habayis. So we see in this Mishnah that all of these stam hekdeshos are for bedek habayis, and everything can be included in bedek habayis. So we see that that's like Rabbi Eliezer, who says also that if somebody's makdish is property stam, so it all goes to bedek habayis, and even the animals you have to sell, and then their value becomes for bedek habayis. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, time to Rabbi Eliezer, the reason for Rabbi Eliezer is because v'ish ki yakdish is beiso kodesh Hashem. The pasuk says that if a person is makdish his house to be holy for God, what are we talking about? In beis dira kvar ksiv v'im makdish yigal is beiso. He can't be talking about his house, because we already have a pasuk that says if a fellow is makdish his house. Rather, it must be talking about a person who is makdish his property. Mikancha stam hekdeshos of bedek habayis. So we see that stam hekdeshos are for bedek habayis. Amr b'zeira Rav Chuna b'shem Rab b'ma pligin. What exactly is the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua? B'makdish nechosav. So the machlokas is the Africa with somebody who's makdish his property. But b'makdish edro. But if he was makdish his flock, kol ama modai shulam mizbeach. Then everybody's going to agree if he's makdish only his flock that it's going to that it will be kachim mizbeach and it will be offered on the mizbeach. Rav Chuna b'shem Rab ma pligin. Makdish edro. So Rabbah, in the name of Rav Chuna, the name of Rav, says that they're arguing about when he's makdish the animals. But if he's makdish all of his property, kol ama modai shul bedek habayis, then everyone agree, like Rabbi Eliezer, that it's going to be for bedek habayis. Adat Rabbi Zeira nicha v'kasha Rabbah. So we say that Taka, it makes sense according to Rabbi Zeira, and it is a question according to Rabbah. How come? Because behema lo lamazbeachi. Because isn't an animal meant for the mizbeach, right? Meaning, according to Reb Zeira, so he says that when if a person is makdish is flock of animals, so everyone agrees that it's going to go on the mizbeach. It's going to be kach mizbeach. So we want to say that taka makes sense, because animals go on the mizbeach. So it wouldn't make sense that if all your makdish is your animals, then it would be kach mizbeach. So the Gemara answers, behema la mizbeach hi. So while it's true that yes, animals do go on the mizbeach, but lama sasa ma'isha azeh, how come this person didn't specifically say that these animals are going to be for kadshe mizbeach? Instead, he just said that these are stam kachim, because it's komer lo yiyeh el bedek habayis. It's his way of basically saying that it should be dafka bedek habayis and not kodshe mizbeach. Rabbi Yochanan Amar says, Rabbi Yochanan lo shanya hi hamakdish nechasav hi hamakdish edro. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no, there's no difference between the flock versus all of his property. It's all the same. Hiya machlokas. There's machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua is going to be whether he's makdish his property, whether he's makdish his animals. Rav Chuna b'shem Rav, Rabbi Abahu b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, kodshe bedek habayis shepod'an tmimin yatzu l'chulin. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, the guy's makdish all of his property, and included in his property are these animals. So we said that they're kodshe bedek habayis. So you have to like sell them, and then the money becomes part of the bedek habayis stuff that he was makdish. So what happens to these animals? So according to Rabbi Eliezer, they mamish. So what we want to say right now, essentially, Rav Chuna in the name of Rav and Rav Abahu in the name of Rav Yochanan, that they mamish become chulin. That they mamish become chulin, just regular animals. Masnisin Amar Kain, we want to say that a Mishnah Taka supports this. Vladan v'chelbon muter la'acher pidyon. So what we want to say is if you have some animals that had a mum, that had a blemish, and then you makdish these animals with a blemish, and then you redeem them. So we say that they mamish become chulin. Not only them, but also their offspring, their milk, everything is mamish chulin. So we want to say that this supports this notion that when you have these animals that were bedek habayis and you repode to them, so they mamish become chulin. Rav Chizkiah b'shem Rav Chizkiah tifta shebedan tmimin v'umamu. So Rav Chizkiah says in the name of Rav Chizkiah that no, that's talking actually about a specific case, that Mishnah. It's talking about where you redeemed them when they were unblemished, and then they developed a blemish after that. So then when they developed a blemish after that, so then they become mamish chulin. But in our case, where you just have like these animals that you were makdish as bedek habayis, then you repoded them, you wouldn't necessarily become chulin. Rabbi Yosef b'shem Rav Chizda masnisin amra kain v'ladan v'chelbon aser la'achar pidyonon. That the Mishnah is talking about in the context of animals that developed a mum, the dafka animals that developed a mum. So then after they are redeemed. So then after they're redeemed, they become, but their offspring and their milk becomes mutter. But if they don't have a mum, so then their offspring and their milk will not be mutter. So it's not necessarily a proof to say over here that these animals that you're makdish as bedek habayis, that you report to them, then that they would necessarily become chulin. Now it says the Gemara, Reb Chizkiah b'shem of Reb Yosa, kodshe bedek habayis sheputan tmimin yatzu l'chulin. So now Reb Chizkiah says in the name of Reb Yosa that actually would make sense, however, to say that if you have these animals that were hektish as bedek habayis, and then you reported them, that they would mamish become chulin, because in temer lo yetzu l'chulin heyach kodshe mizbeach cholin al kodshe bedek habayis. So he wants to argue that mistame, when you have these animals that were kodshe bedek habayis and then you reported them, they have to become chulin, because what are you going to do with the fellow who bought these animals? What's he going to do with them? He's going to offer them as a korban. So now, well, if they still remain kodshe bedek habayis, well then how would he be able to offer them as a korban? Rather, it must be that they mamish become chulin. So the Gemara answers not necessarily. You could kind of have this funny answer that actually the kodshe bedek habayis, immediately after you redeem them, they like immediately somehow get this like kodshe mizbeach midrabanan laida mila. To what extent? Legiza v'la'avoda, in terms of that you can't take its wool or work it. Okay, so therefore somehow when you have this bedek habayis and you redeem it, it doesn't become chulin per se. It like immediately gets this like dirabanan kodshe mizbeach status. Okay, kind of weird. What if you have a fellow and he sets aside a female animal and he says it's going to be my korban ola, or it's going to be my korban pesach, or it's going to be my korban ashram? Now the problem is that you cannot bring a female animal as an ola, a pesach, or an ashram. So osa tamur. So the Tanna Kama says that nonetheless it can make a tamura. What's a tamura? Okay, so tamura is when you have one animal, right? You take an animal, you set aside, you say it's going to be echves, nishta korban ola, okay? Then for whatever reason, I don't know why, but you decide that you want to swap out this animal for a different animal. And you take another animal, you say, you know what, instead I'm going to bring this animal. So what happens is both animals now have the same kedusha of the original one, i.e. an animal that's going to be offered as a shlamim, but you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to, and you only offer one of them. So now the thing is, in order for this second animal to have like a status of being a Tamura animal, well, the first one has to actually be a real korban. Now the thing is, in this case, you took a female as an Ola or a Shlamim or a Pesach, but a female cannot be an Ola or a Shlamim or a Pesach. So the question is it like holy enough to like make the one that you want to swap, right, when you come and say, actually, I want to bring this one instead, so then that only becomes a Tamura if the original was actually a korban. So the question is it korbani enough to make the other thing a Tamura? So the Tanakama says, yes, it is. Reb Shimon Omer, the Ola osa Tamura. So Reb Shimon says, well, for the Ola, yes, it's korbani enough to be able to make the one that you want to offer in its stead a Tamura. The Fischol Asham eno osa Tamura. But when it comes to korban Pesach or an Asham, then this animal that you set aside, this female animal as your Pesach or your Asham, is completely irrelevant. It has no korban status, and therefore this one that you decide that you want to bring instead isn't really coming to swap anything, and it doesn't become a Tamura. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Mishum Reb Shimon, in the name of Reb Shimon, le'olaso lefischo ulashamo eno osa Tamura, he says that actually none of them will be a Tamura. Not the Ola, not the Pesach, not the Asham, none of them will be able to make a Tamura because they're all irrelevant. Amar Reb Yochanan, says Reb Yochanan, time of Reb Shimon, Shekin Matzinu Nekeva Ba'ov Ksher Lavo Ola. Says Reb Yochanan that the reason why Reb Shimon says that specifically when it comes to an Ola, so then a female that you designate as a korban Ola will be able to make a Tamura, is because we find that by a bird you can have a female Ola offering by a bird, and therefore even though by an animal you cannot, but since by a bird you can have a female Ola, so then by an animal, even though you can never have a female animal as an Ola, but since by a bird you can, since there is a concept of a female Ola, so therefore it can make a Tamura. Reb Yochanan, time of Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, and Reb Yochanan says that the reason for Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, who says that according to Reb Shimon, even an Ola would not make a Tamura if you set aside a female as an Ola. So im min b'mino chaluk alav kol sheken min b'she'eno mino. Well, if within its own species you're not allowed to, there are distinctions certainly between different species. What in the world does that mean? Ezu min b'mino, what exactly is this within its own species where we say that it won't make a Tamura? Shu chaluk alav ka'adadatani. It's like that which you taught. Asham ben shana ve'evi ben shtayim. Right? If you, in a situation where you have to bring a korban asham within its first years, right? For example, a Nazir who became, who became tameh, right? So he has to bring an asham in its first year, right? Ve'evi ben shtei shanim, but he brought a korban that was 2 years old, right? Ben shtayim ve'evi ben shalosh. If you have an asham for somebody who's supposed to bring one in its second year, for example, I think if you know testimony about somebody and you don't give it, so I think then you bring a korban asham that's 2 years old, ve'evi ben shalosh, ve'evi ben shana, and instead he brought a animal that was only 1 year old. So basically, he mamish brought the right animal. He brought like a male sheep or whatever it is, right? But the thing is, it's the wrong age. But like mamish, this exact animal, if it was just in a different context, can mamish be allowed? Lo yatsa. Reb Shimon Omer kol atzman and kachim. They're not even kachim, and certainly there would be no me'ilah. And that's in a case of where like the same exact animal, in a different context, you'd be able to offer. However, when it comes to a female Ola, you will never be able to offer a female Ola. Sure, it's very nice if it was a bird, you'd be able, but it's not a bird, it's an animal. You can never offer a female animal as a Ola, and therefore says Reb Shimon ben Yehuda that according to Reb Shimon, you'd be unable to offer a, if you bring an animal as a Tamura of a female Ola, it will not be, it won't be a Tamura. Amr Reb Yochanan says Reb Yochanan, Reb Shimon for Yoshua Shneim Amu Davar Echad, that Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda say the same thing. They're really talking about Reb Shimon ben Yehuda. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda and Reb Yoshua say the same thing. Meaning Reb Shimon, as explained by Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, and Reb Yoshua say the same thing. Kimad Reb Yoshua Amar, like Reb Yoshua said, Nekeva le'ola lo kidsha, that when you have this Nekeva, for an Ola, it didn't work. Ela hektish damim. It's only hektish dam, because according to Reb Yoshua, right? If you're makdish your property and on there are female animals, so we say what you do is that you sell it and then the money you take to then go and buy an ola, but it itself doesn't become an ola. So, Omar, Reb Shimon Omar, Nikeva Ola lo kidsha ela hektish damim, and Reb Shimon says also that this female ola doesn't have any kedushas haguf. In Tamar kadosh kedushas haguf yiru. Now, because according to Rabbi Yoshua, right, who says that when you're makdish all of your property, if there are females over there, so then you sell them, and then the money you use to buy an ola. But if it had kedushas haguf, if the animal would itself be considered a korban, well, then you shouldn't just be able to sell it; it would have to graze until it gets a mum. Amar Rebbe says, Rebbe einani roa is divrei Reb Shimon b'Pesach. Rebbe says, I don't understand Reb Shimon's opinion when it comes to Pesach, because Reb Shimon said that when it comes to like the regular Reb Shimon's opinion, so he said when it comes to an ola, since by birds you can have the concept of an ola, so therefore a female ola by a bird, so therefore even by animals, Reb Shimon wanted to say that it would be shaykh to Tamura. So it says Rebbe einani roa is the Reb Shimon b'Pesach. I don't understand why Reb Shimon says by a korban Pesach that a female korban Pesach there's no din of Tamura. How come? Shamusar Pesach b'shlamim? Because after all, a Mosar Pesach is offered as a shlamim, and therefore since a female can be brought as a shlamim, so Rebbe wants to argue that just like Reb Shimon says that, well, even though this female animal cannot be offered as an ola, but the female, but a female bird could be offered as an ola. We'll say the same thing by an asham then. By the korban Pesach, that even though yes, a female animal cannot be brought as a korban Pesach, but leftover korban Pesachs become shlamim, and a female animal could be a shlam. So we should say that there should be Tamura. But one second, if you're going to do that, so why don't you take it a step further also, Rebbe, and say that you don't understand Reb Shimon's opinion by Asham. Mosar Asham ba'ola, because leftover Ashams could be brought as an ola. And an ola, a female bird could be an ola. So Kilo, it's two steps removed, which is essentially going to be the downfall of that concept, but of the suggestion. But basically, the Gemara wants to offer, well, according to Rebbe, then this female animal that was set aside as an asham, well, even though it can't be brought as an asham, but leftover ashams become olas. And olas, if you have a female bird, it can be brought as an ola. So therefore, maybe even a female asham should be able to be a tamura. So Amr b'avin im hikdish pesach ba'shlamim gufo kariv shlamim. Im hikdish asham ba'ola ein gufo kariv ola. But yeah, the difference is that when it comes to korban Pesach, a leftover korban Pesach that we bring as a shlamim, so it itself will be brought as a shlamim. This animal itself will be brought as a shlamim. Whereas but when it comes to an asham, not only will this female never be brought as an asham, if it's left over, then it'll be shaykh to an ola, but it still will never be brought as an ola. Only a bird will be brought as an ola. So it's just too far removed. So we wouldn't go that far. Ma'u kedun. So nonetheless, what's the difference between Rebbe and Reb Shimon? How come Rebbe wants to apply this concept of like some other thing could be brought as a korban by a Pesach, to say that since leftover Pesach is a shlam, so therefore and shlam could be female, so therefore it should be a tamur, whereas Reb Shimon doesn't want to say that. So Amr Hahein Amr hektish domim hektish hikdish ve'ein Amr hektish gufo hikdish. Well, Reb Shimon says that it was just the monetary value that he was makdish, whereas according to Rebbe, he says it was actually the korban itself. And because it was the korban itself, that it was the gufo shel korban that he offered, well, therefore, if it's left over, so then mamish will become a korban shlamim, and he will be able to offer it, and therefore it should be a tamura, whereas Reb Shimon says it's just monetary value. Reb Zira b'shem Reb Shimon ben Lakish Talmid Reb Yeshua daber laharin ve'albanav ve'al kol bnei Yisrael v'marta aleim. So says Reb Zira, what's the reason for Reb Yoshua, who says that when you consecrate all of your possessions, so then if there are animals, the animals itself become kedushas mizbeach, as opposed to the rest of the property that become kedushas damim. So he says, because he said the pasuk says daber aharin ve'albanav ve'al kol bnei Yisrael, say to Aharon and his children and all of bnei Yisrael v'marta aleim, and say to them ish mibeis Yisrael v'gomer sheyakriv la'Hashem le'ola, that will be makriv to God for an ola. So akol kariv le'ola. right? So everything is brought from an ola, right? Because Rabbi Yeshua had said that, right, these animals that are kedushas mizbeach, so then they're both olas, right? If it's a male, so you offer it as an ola. If it's a female, so then you sell it as a shlamim, and then the money you bring as an ola. So how come it's davka and ola? Well, because it says Asher Yaakov Lashem the ola, Hakol Kariv ola. Everything is brought davka as an ola. The tzornchem tamim zachar minayin afilu nekevis. So when it says so how do we know that even the females have to be brought as an ola? Because we said that if it's a female, so then you sell it as a shlamim, then the money is brought to davka to buy an ola. How do we know that it applies even to females? Tamalomer babakar. It says by the cattle. The rabbis says nekevos because it doesn't say specifically female. It doesn't say specifically male by the cattle, right? Because where it says by the tzon, right? It said akokar the tzonchem tamim zachar. Right there by the sheep, it has to be a male. When it comes to the cattle, it doesn't say male or female, so therefore it's even that comes to even include the females to say that they are brought as an ola. Rabbi Yitzchak Bey, Rabbi Eliezer Shal, Ksiv Zachar, Vat Amar Babakar, L'Rabos Esanakevos. Well, one second. First, and initially by the sheep it said male, but then it says Babakar, where it doesn't say male or female, so we say that comes to include the females. Well, then the Kavasa Ksiv Tamim Ve'at Amar Babakar, L'Rabos Bali Mumin. Why don't we say that? Well, by bakar it doesn't have a description, so let's say that it's not only to include unblemished animals, maybe it even includes blemished animals should be brought as a korban ola. Ma beneon, Rav Amar shifta de kad kida beneon. Do you say no? Come on, it's apples and oranges. It's like the stick of a weaver is in between them. There's right, which kind of separates like the loom, so you can throw the warp through there. So no, the woof or the weft or whatever, meaning they're very different. Obviously, you cannot bring an animal that has a blemish. You can never bring an animal that has a blemish. However, we are saying that a female would be shaykh to korban ola, and there are cases where you bring a female not as an ola but as a shlam, for example, and therefore we're saying that even if this animal that was part of your property is a female, you would sell it as a shlamim, and then the proceeds would be brought as an ola. Oh my goodness gracious! Well, that was Daf Yud Beis. This stuff was a shtickle all over the place, and then join that together with the fact that it's Yerushalmi, and it creates kind of a perfect storm. But look, don't give up on me yet. Tomorrow we got a few amazing days ahead of us, so get excited for that.